streets. The only way to do that is to secure the border. And we need an all-of-the-above approach to border security that includes manpower, 21st century technology, and barriers. With this approach, we will deter human trafficking, human smugglers, and others from crossing hundreds of miles of open desert with innocent children and putting those children in grave danger. Fewer drugs will make it into the United States, saving lives and making our community safer. We know an all-of-the-above approach works. In areas where we have built a wall system, illegal traffic has plummeted. In San Diego, illegal traffic dropped 92% after the barrier was erected. In El Paso, illegal traffic dropped 95%. And in Tucson, illegal traffic dropped 90%. Let's build on this success. Border security and keeping Americans safe used to be priorities for both our parties. I've been on this committee since, just like the chairman, since its inception. We never argued about whether barriers worked until Donald Trump wanted them. This is not rocket science. Now that many of my Democrat colleagues are going to be calling for the abolition of ICE, and I don't understand that. Rather than use this hearing to score political points, I encourage my colleagues to take this opportunity to hear from the Secretary herself about the challenges at our border and what the committee can do to address the changing dynamics as I've just described. I welcome the Secretary's testimony and the excellent work she's been doing for our committee, and I thank the Chairman for the time and yield back.
Thank you very much. Other members of the committee are reminded that under the committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. The Chair also wishes to remind members of the committee and members of the audience that Rule 10A prohibits breaches of committee decorum and allows the Chair to respond accordingly. With that, let me introduce our witness today. Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen has been the Secretary of Homeland Security since December 2017 and was last before the committee in April of 2018. I want to thank her for joining us today and look forward to her testimony. I now ask the Secretary to rise and be sworn in. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and beliefs, so help you God? I want to thank the Secretary. Without objection, the witness's full statement will be inserted in the record. I now recognize the Secretary to summarize her statement for 5 minutes.
Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Rogers, and distinguished members of the committee, it is my honor to appear before you today. Before I begin, I want to note that our department has many missions. Our people work tirelessly every day, around the clock, to strengthen the safety and security of the American people against terrorists, transnational criminal organizations, hackers, rogue nation states, natural disasters, and more. I want to applaud them always for their extraordinary vigilance in protecting us all from persistent and emerging threats. But today I want to focus on one core mission in particular, our duty to secure our borders. This is one of the highest priorities of our President, this administration, and my department. Indeed, it is among the most fundamental responsibilities of any sovereign nation. I want to start by stressing that our country remains a beacon of hope, freedom, and opportunity to the world. We welcome more immigrants, temporary workers, and foreign travelers every year than any other nation on earth. Each year, more than 1 million people become lawful permanent residents of the United States. Legal immigration has been a bedrock of this country. We want to strengthen legal immigration and welcome more individuals through a merit-based system that enhances our economic vitality and the vibrancy of our diverse nation. We also will continue to uphold our humanitarian ideals. But illegal immigration is simply spiraling out of control and threatening public safety and national security. We face a crisis, a real, serious, and sustained crisis at our borders. We have tens of thousands of illegal aliens arriving at our doorstep every month. We have drugs, criminals, and violence spilling into our country every week. And we have smugglers and traffickers profiting from human misery every single day by exploiting people who are seeking a better life, deceiving them about our laws, and fueling everything from sexual slavery to child exploitation to the smuggling of illicit goods. Make no mistake, this chain of human misery is getting worse. Yesterday, we announced that the numbers of apprehension at our southern border have spiked again, substantially. Since late last year, we have been seeing 50,000 to 60,000 migrants arrive at our southern border each month. But in February, we saw a 30% jump over the previous month, with agents apprehending or encountering nearly 75,000 aliens. This is an 80% increase over the same time last year. And I can report today that CBP is forecasting the problem will get even worse this spring as the weather warms up. The projections are dire. The agency is now on track to apprehend more migrants crossing illegally in the first 6 months of this fiscal year than the entirety of FY17. And at the current pace, we are on track to encounter close to 1 million illegal aliens at our southern border this year. Our capacity is already severely restrained, but these increases will overwhelm the system entirely. This is not a manufactured crisis. This is truly an emergency. What's different about the current migrant flows, and this is important, is not just how many people are coming, but who is arriving. Historically, illegal aliens crossing into the United States were predominantly single adult males from Mexico with no legal right to stay, and who we could quickly detain and remove within 48 hours. But in recent years, we have seen the numbers of vulnerable populations, children and families, skyrocket. Over 60% of the current flow are family units and unaccompanied alien children, and 60% are non-Mexican. Because of outdated laws, misguided court decisions, and a massive backlog of cases, we are often forced to release these groups into the United States, and we have virtually no hope of removing them in the future. And importantly, our ability to help those truly in need is severely limited. The vast majority of these individuals are from Central America. While many of them initially claim asylum and are led into the United States, only 1 in 10 are ultimately granted asylum by an immigration judge. Unfortunately, when it comes time to remove the other 90%, they have often disappeared into the interior of our country. Smugglers and traffickers have caught on, realizing that the outdated laws, lack of resources, and bad court decisions effectively give them a free ticket into America. Information about the weaknesses in our system have spread quickly in Central America. In fact, they are advertised. And our booming economy under President Trump has made the dangerous journey even more attractive to migrants. As a result, the flow of families and children has become a flood. In the past 5 years, we have seen a 620% increase in families, or those posing as families, apprehended at the border. This last fiscal year was the highest on record. And of great concern to me is that the children are being used as pawns to get into our country. We have encountered recycling rings where innocent young people are used multiple times to help aliens gain illegal entry. As a nation, we simply cannot stand for this. We must fix the system. Today's migrant flows have created a humanitarian catastrophe. In one study, more than 30% of women reported sexual assault along the way, and 70% of all migrants reported experiencing violence. Smugglers and traffickers are forcing migrants into inhumane conditions, demanding extraordinary sums of money and putting their lives in danger. And vulnerable populations, especially children, are coming into DHS sicker than ever before. This is also a public safety and national security crisis. TCOs are using the situation to line their pockets, fueling a rise in other illegal activity and the spread of violent crime into our country. Gang members are smuggling new recruits into the United States, with CBP recording a 50% spike over the last fiscal year of the number of gang members apprehended at the southern border alone. And DHS personnel are grappling daily with the movement of drugs, illicit goods, and unknown threat actors coming across the borders. So what are we doing about this? At the President's direction, we are confronting it head-on in many ways. Let me try to quickly summarize. We've championed a border wall system, which includes infrastructure, technology, and additional personnel. We've implemented virtually every measure within our authority to end catch and release, to keep aliens with no legal right to stay from being released into our country. We've worked with the Pentagon to deploy troops to the southern border, which has helped us achieve tens of thousands of apprehensions and turnbacks of illegal aliens. We've dramatically increased referrals for prosecutions of single adults illegally crossing the border from 12% at the start of the administration to nearly 50% today. We have worked tirelessly with the Northern Triangle countries I myself can attest to the many trips that I've made and the conversations and negotiations I've had to deal with the root causes of migration and to address the challenges at the source. I talk to my counterparts in Central America almost weekly. I travel down there regularly, and this month I'm happy to report that we expect to sign a historic regional compact, the first ever, with those countries to counter irregular migration, human smuggling, trafficking, and the formation of caravans. This is something I've been pursuing for years, and it will have a real effect on this crisis. We've stepped up efforts to protect women and children from being abused, kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and exploited upon the dangerous journey, and we're doing more to dismantle TCOs, including through concerted interagency action and deeper foreign partnerships. We've intensified operations to seize illicit drugs, especially opioids, as they are smuggled into the U.S., including through the deployment of new technology. We're putting in place important measures to reduce asylum fraud so we can better help those who are truly fleeing persecution. This includes having certain individuals wait in Mexico until their claims are processed and where they are afforded humanitarian protection to ensure that the flow is safe and orderly. But it's simply still not enough. We need Congress to act so that we can take operational control of the border, as Congress directed us in law to do, to protect vulnerable populations, to reduce the life-ending flow of drugs into America, and to confront the scourge of human trafficking. Without congressional action, America's borders will never be secure. Until we deal with the outdated laws that contribute to this problem, the situation will only get worse. Simply put, the laws are not keeping up with the migrant flows. The gaps in the system are obvious. Just as laws must be revised to address technological advances and emerging threats, so too must the laws be changed to address vastly different circumstances at the border. If migrants arrive with children, we can only detain them for days and then we have to release them. Even when they have no legal right to stay, we cannot keep them together as a family.
Please summarize your statement.
Please. So what do we need? We need Congress to change the law to promote family unity, to ensure the safe and prompt return of UACs back to their home countries, and to close loopholes that allow dangerous criminals to get released into our communities. I'm happy to, in response to questions, talk more about our activities with the Northern Triangle, but I would just like to conclude my remarks by asking for Congress to work with me. I'm happy to meet with anyone that has a suggested solution. No rational person would design an immigration system like we have today. It's dangerous for Americans, it's dangerous for migrants, it undermines our nation's values, and it fails to uphold our fundamental obligations to the American people. Although we may disagree on solutions, I hope there can be a consensus that the current system isn't working and that this is an emergency we must address together. I look forward to your questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. We allowed you to go over because some people need to hear you for the first time.
I greatly appreciate that, sir.
So, and thank you. As I said in my opening statements, Madam Secretary, we've sent requests for a number of information to you, and we've not gotten the information back. Can you commit to this committee to get that information back?
Apologies. Yes, sir.
And it's in detail. It's not where it needs to be. So I want to encourage you there. Asylum seekers. A lot of us have had an opportunity to talk to a number of people involved. Can you tell the committee why asylum seekers are being turned around contrary to law?
Sir, all asylum seekers have the opportunity to present their case. We're not turning anybody around. What we are doing is exercising statutory authority that enables us to, in conjunction with Mexico, to return to Mexico migrants who have arrived from that country to await their processing. This is to assure a safe and orderly flow and to ensure that their humanitarian rights are protected.
So your testimony is that, to your knowledge, no one presents themselves for asylum and is not presented their rights as to what they have to do?
Our policy and processes when we encounter, as you know, an alien is we do provide them with information on their legal rights, their ability to access counsel. I'm not sure if you're referring to credible fear. If you do not pass that initial credible fear screening, obviously then you can appeal that, but generally speaking, you do not go on to meet before an immigration judge for your asylum claim.
So is that something you do in writing or you do it orally?
Both. They are presented with information in writing, and then we also, of course, advise them orally.
Can you present this committee with the written direction that asylum seekers receive from your department when they present themselves?
Yes.
The other situation is the president made a comment that he really didn't need to do the emergency declaration. He just wanted to do it faster. Do you have any information for the committee as to what he was talking about?
My conversations, of course, with the president, generally speaking, are protected under privilege. But what I would say is his explanation in general and public has been that he hoped Congress would act, that it didn't have to come to issuing an emergency declaration if Congress had met his request to fund the resources that CBP has requested.
To your knowledge, are you aware of family members who've been separated from their children and deported back to a country without their children?
Yes, sir.
Can you provide this committee with a list of those individuals?
I'm happy to do that with the one caveat that, as you know, that's part of ongoing litigation in Miss L, and as long as there's no privacy concerns from the court, of course, we're happy to provide that. A lot of the information is in the Miss L court with respect to each migrant. I would also just note that, consistent with longstanding practice in the law, before we deport any alien after they have gone through the process and receive a final order of removal, we do ask them if they would like to take their children with them. At that same time, their consulate or embassy, for purposes of issuing them travel papers, also asks them, would you like to be removed with your children as you're removed? As part of Miss L, the judge also asked us to go back and ask the parents again in conjunction with the ACLU, which we did. So there was no parent who has been deported, to my knowledge, without multiple opportunities to take their children with them.
So is this with counsel present?
I'm sorry?
Is this with their attorney present?
I can't speak to every case with that, sir.
So
they have the right to a counsel, as you know, but the United States government does not pay for that pursuant to the law.
So explain how one would acquire counsel if they don't know it.
We give them lists of available resources, legal resources in the area. We work closely with the NGOs to ensure that they understand the options for that. And then certainly when they work with the consulates and embassies as part of that removal process to receive the travel authorization, the embassies and consulates also provide them with information and ability to access counsel.
Some of us have had an opportunity to see some of the enhanced barriers being placed on ports of entry. We tried to find a policy directive that said we should close lanes and put barriers on those lanes, concrete barriers and barbed wire. Are you familiar with any such policy?
The general direction for the safety of the migrants and the officers who work at the ports of entry is to ensure a controlled environment, particularly after we saw the violence from one of the caravans in the fall. Many of the local border chiefs, the OFO officers at the ports determined what was needed to ensure that there was safety and security at the port. So that's for the migrants, that's for the officers. So generally speaking, that was done on a case-by-case situation with the overall direction to ensure the integrity and safety of that area.
So there's no written policy?
It's not a policy, sir, per se, but the direction is clear to protect officers and migrants and ensure a safe and orderly flow. To do that, we have to make sure that the migrants go through the designated area. So the enhancements to the port of entry was to disable them from at their own risk, which we have seen many times, run across lanes of traffic or try to go around a port of entry.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on something you referenced in your opening statement and then the chairman probed you on to more fully understand this asylum seeker circumstance. You made reference in your statement that for many of, well, first of all, that 90% of the asylum seekers are denied when they actually finally have their hearing. The other, and those 90% generally have already blended into the society. We can't get rid of them. If we know only 10% are going to be improved based on history, I don't still understand why we're letting people in while they wait on their hearing. You made reference in your statement that many of them are allowed to stay in Mexico until their hearing date. My question is, why aren't all of them required to stay in Mexico until their hearing date? So that way we can monitor them while they're here for their hearing, and if they're approved, they stay. If they can't, they go back to Mexico. Is that because of a statutory reason, or why?
It's actually more based around, we're trying to do this in a very reasoned way. So we are expanding that program across the border. We work and notify the Mexicans as we do that. You have seen statements made by their secretary, their equivalent to Secretary Pompeo and my equivalent, that they are determined to protect the humanitarian rights. So we do it in conjunction with them as we expand the program. We're doing it in a very systematic way. But the goal is to expand that across the border.
So you are trying to get to the point to where
Yes.
only people can get in for their hearing at the time of their hearing?
Yes.
Excellent. What can we help you with to make that happen more rapidly?
So we have all of the authority we need from the underlying INA statute. What we are looking for is additional requests, if any, that we need to come back to you with. This requires some new things. For example, transportation from the ports to the courts. So when we have the court date, we will go back to the port to pick up the migrant, take he or she to the court. That is not a transportation need we've had in the past. So that's just one example, but we are looking through to see if we can fund those as we expand the program with our current resources. If not, we would come back with a request.
My understanding is that the Mexican government has made available asylum to all asylum seekers who have been coming from south of Mexico into the country trying to get to the United States. Is that accurate?
My understanding is they have offered both asylum to the vast majority, if not all, of the migrants, but they have also offered work permits.
So if somebody is fleeing Venezuela or Honduras because of their concerns over safety, and they get into Mexico, by the time they get to Mexico's northern border to come into our country, there is no danger to them and their safety.
My plea to anybody that chooses to take this journey is to please seek protection as soon in the journey as possible. It's an extraordinarily dangerous journey. So my advice to migrants throughout the region is please accept protection as soon as possible.
Okay. I'd like to give you some time. You made reference to the Northern Triangle that you, in your opening statement, that you'd like to talk more about it. Would you tell us what you had in mind?
Sure. So beginning about 9 months ago, I had traveled to the region many times between the border and the Northern Triangle in Mexico. I've been there about 25 times and have had multiple discussions with my partners in the Northern Triangle. What we're working on together are ways to dismantle transnational criminal organizations, to identify the criminals who are preying on the vulnerable populations, to work with international organizations such as UNHCR to increase asylum capacity in the region, to make sure that we're sharing information so we understand who is in the flow. That latter relates to the increases in special interest aliens that are in the flow, and to make sure that we can keep families together. So how can we design a system that begins at the start to make sure that migrants are protected and they don't need to take this dangerous journey?
Great. Do you know how much the smugglers charge people to get across the border generally?
So it varies. Our estimates, and then most recently as last week, what we heard from Mexican counterparts is about $6,000 a migrant. It's more
And
for families.
to your knowledge, do they coach the migrants as to what to say when they get to the border to be able to get in?
We have seen instances, absolutely, throughout the region where they are provided information on pieces of paper. There's also advertisements through social media. There's a WhatsApp conversation particular to this to give them, if you will, specific words to claim credible fear once they reach our border.
Great. Thank you. My time's expired. I appreciate your service.
Thank you, Chair. Now recognize the young lady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Let me thank the chairman and the ranking member for holding this hearing and the chairman's leadership on these issues. Madam Secretary, let me thank you for your service. Over the past couple of months, I'm very proud of the members of this committee, particularly my colleagues on the Democratic side, who almost everyone have been to the border because of their desire to be proficient and efficient on making the right decisions. And so my knowledge of this committee has been that every single Secretary of Homeland Security I've had a terrific working relationship with, regardless of the presidential politics or party, because our commitment here is to secure the nation. I believe if a horrific tragedy happens again, it is this committee and that in the Senate that will be looked to by the American people to devise the right approach. Do you believe that you, as Secretary of Homeland Security, have the independence of the White House to make the right decisions? Can you independently make a decision in contrary to the President of the United States on behalf of the American people for what is best for them?
Ma'am, what I can tell you is I take my oath with utmost extreme importance. I always do my best.
Is that your oath to the American people, your oath to the President of the United States?
No, ma'am. The oath, as you know, is to the Constitution and the people of the
Right. And in that vein, do you have the ability to make independent determinations?
I do what I believe is best for the men and women of DHS in this country.
And have you advised the President on his emergency declaration? Have you given him the grounds for this emergency declaration in the context of what emergency means?
What I have done is I've given him all the facts from the men and women working at the border, many of whom I know you all have met with, and thank you for that. So what I do is I give him the operational reality. Here's what we're facing, here's what we're seeing, here are the facts. By my read of it, it is an emergency, it is a dual crisis. That's the information I provide.
Well, if there's any data that you have given him in particular, I'm going to request that it be made available to this committee, whether in the classified sections or not, in writing. And if there have been any memos that you've directed to the President that would have given him the basis of calling for, in my opinion, a false emergency declaration, I will not judge your data if you're giving facts, then I would like that to be submitted to this committee. Let me...
Ma'am, if I could, I would be remiss if I didn't say much of the information that I give in private to the President, of course, is covered under confidentiality privileges. We're happy to give you any information that we work on from the operators. We're very transparent. Most of that information, as you know, is published on our website. Happy to give you that, but I would not be able to speak to any particular conversation I had with the President.
Well, I will not dwell on that. I will leave this to the chairman of the full committee on the question of confidentiality. I think members of Congress are due classified information, and there's a question of confidentiality or privilege. I'm not sure what you're exerting here, but I would offer that...
It's not mine to exert or
right.
waive.
So I would say that I would want the material that you had provided to the President of the United States to make his decision. Let me ask you, do you have a census of all of the children that are being detained in the various facilities, both the ones at the border and others that are in partnership with HHS? Do you know how many young people are detained?
Yes, ma'am. I don't have that number in front of me. We have all of the numbers.
Would you provide that for me?
Yes.
The next question is, what is the pathway of reuniting those children detained? My number is about 12,000 plus. What is the pathway for reuniting those children presently existing in detention centers who have been there for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years plus?
The best data that we have is the data that's been approved from the Miss L case, and I believe you all have access to that. I don't want to take up time unless you'd like me to in reading it, but it walks through how many children remain in the custody.
But can you give me a number for the record?
Yeah, so sure. It breaks down of the original 2,816 that the court identified, 207.35 have been discharged.
Right. But I'm asking you for those that are in the partnership between Homeland Security and HHS. You have centers around the nation, some run by Southwest Keys, upwards of 12,000 children. Have you tried to reunite them with some guardian or family member?
Yes, so HHS, as you know, under TVPRA is required to find a sponsor for the child. That's what they do, so that is part of
That is a program that I designed, and I believe that it should be in cooperation, and I'm going to ask you on the record, not to give the answer now, but I need to know the numbers and how many are being reunited, because ICE is represented that they are stopping those families from being reunited.
ICE is not stopping families from being represented. There are three...
Reunited.
Reunited. There are three instances in longstanding practice which CBP, not ICE, encounters a family unit presenting as a family unit where separation may be necessary. The first one is if the adult accompanying that child is not a parent or legal guardian. The second, if there is a risk to the child. And the third is if the parent otherwise needs to go to a custodial prosecutorial setting. Longstanding process. The numbers are not high, happy to provide them with you, but that is what CBP does at the border for the protection of the child.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll have questions for the record. Thank you. And the answers have not been given. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, thank you for your service, and I appreciate you being here today. I'd like to focus, if I could, on unaccompanied minors, specifically involving MS-13. My district, unfortunately, is probably the epicenter of MS-13. We had a series of 25 murders within 18 months from the fall of 2015 to the spring of 2017. I think almost all the victims were immigrants, documented and undocumented. So it was a slaughter within the immigrant community. What we found was that many of those murders were carried out by unaccompanied minors. I think in the most recent series of indictments, of the 11 indicted for murders, 7 of them had come across as unaccompanied minors. And let me commend your department and others. Since April of 2017, there have been no murders. There were 25 in the previous 18 months, none in Suffolk County since then, and I commend you for that. HSI has done an outstanding job. FBI, Justice Department are working in conjunction with the Suffolk and Nassau County Police, so I thank you for that. But what was found at the time was that these minors coming across, a number of them were actually sent by MS-13, or if they weren't sent by MS-13, the families that volunteered to take them in from HHS were either supporters of MS-13 or had relatives back in Central America whose lives are being threatened if they did not take them in. And then they went into the schools, and in certain schools, there are actually areas of the school that were taken over by MS-13 young people. And again, as I said, a series of those, a large number of those murders were carried out by MS-13. What the police said at the time was they were concerned that there was no vetting when these unaccompanied minors, I know they get turned over to HHS, so this is maybe more of an HHS issue than yours, but again, as to whether or not they had any MS-13 connections, nor was there any vetting of the families who were volunteering to take them, nor were the local police notified when these unaccompanied minors were coming into these school districts. And the school district had no choice but to take them. So I ask you now, is there increased vetting as to knowing whether or not these unaccompanied minors have any MS-13 connections, whether or not the families volunteering to take them have MS-13 connections, and are local law enforcement notified when these unaccompanied minors come into their districts?
Thank you. Let me take them bite sizes.
Yeah.
We do now do background checks. One of the things I was very concerned about when I came in as secretary is that we were not doing enough to protect children, to ensure that the adult coming to pick them up out of HHS care did not pose them a threat. And certainly one of the threats that could be posed would be if that adult was part of MS-13. We now do background checks. HHS uses the information on that background check to determine the suitability of the sponsor before they release the child. I'm not aware, and I'm happy to get back to you for the record, I'm not aware if HHS consistently tells communities where UACs are placed and if there is a concern that the UAC might have gang ties. I'm not aware of that, but I'm happy to get you that information from HHS. On the front end, when we encounter UACs, certainly if we believe they are a risk in any way, The brief time that we have them before we transfer them to HHS, we will separate them out from the other population of children for the safety of the other children. But other than that, we do not have a systematic way to ask UACs or look into their background while they're in our custody.
Do you feel there's enough cooperation between DHS and HHS?
We do work very closely together day to day. We share the modeling, the projections, what children are coming in, what children they're releasing. It does, in my opinion, need to be a bit stronger with respect to ensuring that the sponsors do not pose a threat.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary. And again, thank you for your efforts. It's been, again, that drop-off of murders has been phenomenal, from 25 to 0. So thank you very much.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, welcome. Thank you for being here today. Let me establish from the outset that we all want stronger border security. The question is, what is the most efficacious way of getting us there, and not creating a solution that fills a political promise but doesn't really achieve strong border security. So I want to just follow up on an issue brought up by the chairman earlier regarding border crossings. And look, I've long held that and have an interest in ensuring that we're making policy based on sound data and credible threats. So it is my understanding, and you've testified some of this morning, that your department keeps accurate statistics of the number of apprehensions at the border. Is that correct?
Apologies, yes.
And these statistics are compiled annually by U.S. Customs and Border Protection and published publicly on its website. That's correct?
Yes, we actually compile them monthly and publish them, but yes.
And according to this report, so the number of apprehensions at the border in 2000 was 1.6 million. Does that sound right?
It was over 1 million, yes, sir.
Okay. And these statistics show that in 2018, the number of apprehensions had fallen to just under 400,000. That's a drop of 75%. Is that right?
Yes, sounds about right.
Okay. So I have a chart that I'd like to display that shows the change in apprehensions. So now I want to ask you about what the President had said about border apprehensions. While touring the South Texas border on January 10th, the President stated of the Border Patrol, there were never so many apprehensions ever in our history. So, Secretary Nielsen, what the President said was not accurate, was it?
I apologize, I don't know the full context of that. What I can tell you is we have encountered more family units per month than ever in history.
No, I just want to know what the President said, is it accurate or not?
I just don't know the context of his statement, sir. If he was talking about family units in a particular sector,
I'm talking about the number. We went from 1.6 million in 2000 apprehensions and 400,000 in 2018. The President said that there were never so many apprehensions at the border in our history up until now. Is that accurate? Was the President accurate?
Again, it depends on the context because it depends on the type of migrant, sir.
Okay, it's either the 400,000 figure is either accurate or it's not. If it's accurate, then the President was not accurate. Is that correct?
Again, we've had monumental high numbers in some areas of the border.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just trying to get a yes or no.
Sir, I just don't know the context of his statement.
Okay.
So I'm trying to give you my most accurate testimony. What I can tell you is that in some places we have had record months of families. In some areas we have had record numbers of apprehensions.
Okay. Well,
the gentleman, I think he's asking for the total number, not a selected category.
The total number, we are on track for this year for 900,000 apprehensions at the border.
But that wasn't the question.
Okay.
Is the President misleading the American people? Is he accurate in what he's saying? It's the largest amount of detentions, or is it not, apprehensions at the border?
In some categories, we have had record-breaking apprehensions.
Okay. Well, the President's claim in in the way I read it, is misled the American people. It gave the public fundamentally flawed factual information on a key border question. Did you take any steps to correct the information when the President stated what he did?
We provide information that we gather from CBP and all of our components for that matter. We provide them as a matter of course to the White House, and we try to put those numbers in context.
Well, Madam Secretary, the reason I ask these questions is they really go directly to the heart of the rationale for the President's emergency declaration. The President has been telling the public that there's an emergency at the border because crossings and apprehensions are at record high levels. But as you really have conceded yourself in the testimony, the facts are exactly the opposite when you're looking at the actual number. Apprehensions today are substantially smaller than they were 20 years ago. And so my time is expired, but it is inaccurate. It's deceitful, I believe, to be inflating numbers or making statements that are not accurate. The President is just wrong.
Chairman, would you mind if I just responded briefly? What I would say, sir, if the larger question is about the emergency, unfortunately what we're seeing is a very different situation. So it's not just the number. It's the abuse of the migrants along the way. It's the sexual abuse. It's the violence. It's the new phenomena that we see of large groups coming, which the system was not prepared to care for. Many of our facilities were made for maybe 100 people a day. We're seeing 1,800 family units in a given sector on a given day. So when you put all of the facts together, the problem is not just the vastly increasing numbers, and again, we jumped another 30% from last month, but it's the type of migrant that our system is not set up to protect. Originally, it was single adults from Mexico. Now it's mostly Central Americans, and the vast majority are vulnerable populations, which are families and children. All of that together is a crisis because the system is not built for that type of flow.
Well, Mr. Landsman, we'll follow up with some more direct information on that. And I would ask the Secretary if yes or no would be very helpful in some of the questions that you asked. And I think that's what Mr. Landsman was really trying to get to, not anything else. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Madam Secretary, welcome to this committee. I've been following the border probably longer than I care to. Back when I was U.S. Attorney, Western District of Texas, to 15 years on this committee, chairman of this committee. Hard to get a good solution, but I can tell you, at least as I see it, and I just want to get your understanding that the threat has changed. It used to be in the old days we had predominantly males crossing for work.
Hey, good morning again, y'all. Thank you for coming. Again, for those of you who didn't join us yesterday, my name is Rita Smith. I am the Public Information Officer for Lee County Emergency Management Agency. We certainly appreciate you guys getting all the word out for us and all the information that we need to get out to our citizens. Today we have some people here that are going to provide us some information. First and foremost, I would like to introduce reintroduce, if you met him yesterday, the Alabama Emergency Management Agency Director, Mr. Brian Hastings.
Thanks, Rita. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thanks for giving us this opportunity to get some words and messaging out to the press. First of all, I want to thank, again, all the efforts of first responders, Sheriff Lee and his team, the Director of Lee County EMA, Kathy Carson, and allowing us to embed in their operations to assist in the recovery operations. So this morning, you are well aware that President Trump last night around 5 o'clock signed Governor Ivey's request for an expedited major disaster declaration for individual assistance and public assistance. That is for Lee County only. It doesn't mean that other counties can't be added to it, but we'll have to do post-disaster assessments. It's just due to the magnitude and the veracity and the damage that impacted Lee County that it was in the county's best interest to get that assistance from the federal government as soon as possible with the 23 victims and the multitude of community folks that are suffering through this devastating tornado. The IA is going to assist with grants, financial assistance to those families who are grieving, trying to bury loved ones, repairs to homes, to get people back on their feet to a sense of whatever normalcy is, but a better tomorrow in the wake of this tremendous tragedy. And then the PA portion of it right now just covers Cat A and Cat B, and Category A is for debris cleanup, which will help because it will be a significant financial burden on the community and the local county. And also on B, which is emergency protective measures, which are all those things that the sheriff, the sheriff department and the fire service has done to make sure that they prepared, they recovered, they responded, and they were doing their search and rescue to make sure that we had identified the victims, the fatalities, and then now we can say, I feel comfortable saying in the Beauregard area that they have accounted for everyone. So that's very good. What you'll see today is that disaster survivor assistance teams will canvass the neighborhoods, and we're trying to find safe spots for them to go. It'll be a mobile van. You'll see some FEMA shirts later on this afternoon, and they'll have some devices that they can reach out to the community, go where people are, go where those survivors are, to start getting them registered and connected with financial assistance for what they're eligible for. And that'll be an important first step of the recovery process. The other thing I want to reiterate, and I saw some people queuing up outside this building, is that as people and resources and volunteers come in, we want to make sure that we funnel them through the Volunteer Reception Center. And on behalf of Director Kathy Carson, I just want to reiterate that that site is in Smith Station, and it's at the Smith Station Baptist Church.